My parents called me for a family meeting, and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. After 4 years of working as a senior project manager at a construction firm, I had grown accustomed to the pressures of my job. Unlike many of my colleagues who often grumbled about demanding schedules and difficult clients, I thrived under pressure. There was something incredibly fulfilling about overseeing a project from its initial concept to its final completion. My apartment, while not particularly large, was mine, or it would be once I finished paying off the mortgage. One Friday evening, as I savored a rare moment of tranquility with a glass of red wine, my phone buzzed. My mother's name lit up the screen. "Hello, Mom," I said, cradling the phone between my shoulder and ear while pouring myself another glass. "Darling," she said, her voice taking on that overly cheerful tone that usually signaled she wanted something. "Your father and I are organizing a family gathering next Saturday. Everyone will be there, and we need you to come. I'm also making your favorite lasagna, the 3-cheese one with homemade sauce." Her lasagna was legendary in our family, and she knew it was my weakness. I couldn't help but smile. "I'll be there." It had been months since I last saw them. Between my grueling 60-hour workweeks and their busy retirement schedules filled with golf and community theater, our lives rarely intersected except during major holidays. Seeing my younger siblings would be interesting, especially with a 12-year age gap between us. While I was working and paying for college, they were still in elementary school, receiving all the attention and the latest gadgets. My parents' approach to parenting had shifted dramatically with me. For me, it was all about responsibility, saving money, and learning to be independent. By the time I was 12, I was doing my own laundry, and by 14, I had become the official babysitter whenever they needed a night out. Meanwhile, my younger siblings grew up with far fewer rules and much more coddling. When I left home at 18, they were still being tucked in at night. Now, at 24, both lived in apartments that our parents helped pay for while they figured out their lives. The following Saturday, I arrived at my parents' house precisely at 4:30 p.m. My siblings' cars were already parked outside. Great, I was the last to arrive, which probably meant they had already been discussing me. As I approached the door, I could hear laughter from inside, which abruptly stopped when I rang the doorbell. My mother opened the door, wearing an apron and a tense smile. Come in," she said, giving me a quick hug. I caught a whiff of garlic mixed with her perfume. My siblings were sitting together on the sofa, leaning toward each other conspiratorially. When I entered, they looked up simultaneously, their expressions feigning indifference. During dinner, the conversation remained superficial. My mother talked about her gardening club, my father mentioned a new golf course, and my siblings gossiped about people I didn't know. No one asked about my work or personal life, which wasn't unusual but still bothered me. The lasagna was delicious, as always, but I couldn't fully enjoy it with the tension hanging in the air. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she served dessert, homemade tiramisu, another favorite of mine. Finally, I put down my fork and said, "What's going on?" "Everyone's acting strange, and Mom made 2 of my favorite dishes. Tell me what this is about." My parents exchanged another uncomfortable look before my father cleared his throat. "We're getting older and have been thinking about the future," he began. My mother added, "We finalized our will and wanted to talk to you in person." "Okay," I said cautiously. "We've decided," my father continued, "that the house and the lake cabin will go to your siblings." Silence filled the room. I looked at my father, expecting more explanation, but he just watched me, waiting for my reaction. "Just to confirm," I finally asked, "that's everything?" My mother adopted a defensive tone. "You have to understand, darling, you're doing very well financially, and they're still looking for stability. They need more security than you do." I glanced at my siblings, both of whom were trying unsuccessfully to hide their satisfied smiles. "Just so it's clear," one of them said, leaning forward, "we wanted you to know directly so there's no confusion later. Everything is ours." I sat there in silence, looking at each of them, my father waiting for me to accept this without question, my mother fidgeting as she tried to justify the unjustifiable, and my siblings barely hiding their triumphant grins. My head was pounding, black sheep of the family, the one who had to fend for herself while they were coddled and supported. I felt a surge of anger as I looked at my parents and siblings, who were now staring at me with a mix of disbelief and frustration. Because it's much easier to blame others than to admit you simply can't handle a schedule, I said, my voice steady but laced with emotion. They exchanged glances, and my father cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. There's nothing to discuss, the decision has been made. I stared at him, incredulous. They need a will? You're still alive. That means you're going to keep paying their expenses until when? My mother avoided my gaze, while my father maintained his firm expression. They're going to need support until they establish themselves. In what? You're overreacting, one of my siblings complained, rolling their eyes. My blood boiled even more. Overreacting? Let's review. You taught me all my life that I had to work hard to get something. You threw me into the world while continuing to give them everything. And now that you're distributing your assets, I'm left out because I tried too hard to get ahead? No one answered. You know what? Fine. You have every right to decide who gets what, but know this, from now on, I'll also make my own decisions. What does that mean? My mother asked suspiciously. It means if you think I don't need anything, then you don't need anything from me either. The confusion was instantaneous. What are you talking about? One of my siblings asked, frowning. About the bills, the help I give you, the money that comes out of my pocket to keep this house running. My mother's eyes widened in surprise. You can't be serious. Very serious. If I'm independent enough not to need an inheritance, then you're also adult enough to take care of your own expenses. My father turned red. That's blackmail. No, that's reciprocity. My heart was pounding. I had never felt so furious, so betrayed, and so determined. I had never asked them for anything, I had never needed them. But the least I expected was respect. The younger ones began to move restlessly. Wait, so that means, I smiled without humor. It means from now on, everyone pays their own bills. My mother was speechless. Daughter, no. I spent my life learning I had to manage on my own. Now it's your turn. They were left open-mouthed. The dinner that had begun with triumphant smiles and security ended in pure panic. I stood up. It's been a pleasure attending this family meeting. Next time, don't bother calling me. I grabbed my purse and left, feeling years of injustice finally behind me. Now let them learn to pay their own bills. Weeks passed since that night, and the silence between us had become something dense, almost tangible. To tell the truth, it didn't bother me at all. Since that disastrous dinner, I hadn't lifted a finger to help them, no transfers, no bills paid, not a single word exchanged, until 2 weeks later when my mother called with a forced casual tone that eventually revealed what she really wanted to say. The house, well, the mortgage is due in a few days, and we thought maybe you could help us just this month. I listened in silence, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and deep anger. Her reaction was immediate, I heard her choking on the other end of the line. She tried to argue, but I didn't let her continue. After that came the messages, first, please, then attempts to make me feel guilty, and finally outright demands. My siblings joined the campaign, demanding I stop being selfish and think about the family. Days later, they asked me to come to my parents' house to talk. When I arrived, the tension was unbearable. My father was sunk in his armchair with a severe face, my mother stood in the kitchen busy with anything just to avoid looking me in the eye, and my siblings were on the sofa, restless and annoyed. What's the emergency? I asked, crossing my arms. My mother spoke first, her tone artificially sweet. Honey, the situation isn't easy. The mortgage is due tomorrow, and we simply haven't been able to gather the money. Oh, how curious, I interrupted sarcastically. Before, I was a work-addicted, money-obsessed freak. Now am I the solution to all your problems? She sighed. I didn't mean that. Then why am I here? My father finally decided to intervene. The bank will take the house if we don't pay. We're trying to find responsible adult. I had always heard that I had to manage on my own, and now that I truly did, they expected me to be the only one carrying this family. My father let out a heavy sigh, defeated. Would you really divide everything in the future? Yes, I replied firmly. I'm not asking you to give me everything. I just want to prevent them from doing exactly what they did now, taking everything and leaving me out. He closed his eyes for a moment, and I could see he was fighting against his pride. All right, we'll do it. My siblings started shouting at the same time, but my father silenced them with a single look. There's no other option. They were furious, I could see the rage in their faces. They knew this meant someday they would have to share the inheritance with me, but that was no longer my problem. The following days were filled with uncomfortable silences and tension. The will was modified with a lawyer present, ensuring everything was legally registered. I transferred the necessary money for the mortgage at the last moment, preventing them from losing the house. My siblings never spoke to me again. My mother tried to pretend everything was normal, while my father remained distant, quieter than ever. As for me, I moved on with my life, knowing for the first time that I had secured what was fair. They didn't like my solution, but now there was nothing they could do about it. I kept my promise, the mortgage was paid. But I never said I would maintain that house for free forever. While they thought everything would return to normal, that I would continue being the fool who solved their financial problems, I already had other plans in mind. At first, no one noticed. Everything seemed the same. My parents sighed with relief, and my siblings returned to their useless routines. But then the notifications started arriving. What is this? My mother asked, holding a letter. I took the envelope calmly and opened it with a smile. Oh, it's the rental contract for the lake house. I closed the deal yesterday. Starting next month, it will be occupied. The impact in the room was immediate. What? My sister shouted, standing up abruptly. I rented out the house, I repeated serenely. And next month, the main house will also be rented. You can't do this, my brother roared, approaching as if to snatch the papers from my hands. I looked at him, unperturbed. Of course I can. It's all in my name. The silence was palpable. You promised you would divide the inheritance in the future, my sister accused, her face flushed with fury. And I will. But until then, these properties are mine, and I decide how they're used. This isn't fair, my brother shouted. Those houses belong to the family. I laughed, a bitter sound. Oh yes, how curious. Because until recently, you were delighted with the idea of leaving me out. Now that I'm smarter, you don't like the idea. My mother watched everything in silence, pale. My father lowered his head as if trying to process what was happening. I'm not keeping the inheritance, I continued, but I decided that you don't deserve anything. Now, would you prefer nothing to something? The houses would be rented, and the rental money would cover the mortgage. I would invest the rest. When the time came, I would decide how to divide everything, but they shouldn't count on me to maintain this luxury while they continued living like parasites. For the first time, I felt free. It was then that I noticed my parents' expressions. There was no anger or indignation, just sadness. From the first month the houses were rented, my bank account grew like never before. Each month, the rental payments covered the mortgage, and I invested the rest intelligently. In less than a year, I had enough money to expand. I bought other properties, diversified my income, and soon money ceased to be a concern for me. Meanwhile, my siblings jumped from job to job, never lasting long enough in any, always complaining that the world was unfair and that people with money were greedy. It didn't surprise me the day they tried to talk to me again. My mother called first, her voice trembling, trying to sound strong but with a pleading tone she didn't bother to hide. Daughter, I know things didn't turn out as we wanted, but maybe we can talk. There's nothing to talk about, I replied bluntly. But we're family. Are we? We didn't seem like it when you decided I didn't deserve anything. She sighed. We didn't do it with bad intentions. I don't care. I don't care why you did it or how you justify it. All I know is that I don't for them. My parents made wrong decisions and paid the price. My siblings believed they could live off others forever, and the world proved them wrong. I only did what I had to do, and thanks to that, I never again had to worry about anyone but myself. 3 years passed since I took control of the properties, and my business flourished. I now own 12 rental properties across 3 cities, with a management company handling day-to-day operations. I moved to a downtown penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. My siblings' lives took different paths. My brother finally found stability working at a car dealership. It wasn't glamorous, but after cycling through 8 jobs in 3 years, he'd learned some humility. My sister struggled longer, bouncing between retail positions before returning to school for a practical nursing degree. They both rented modest apartments and lived within their means. Necessity had become an effective teacher. Then came the call I never expected. My father had suffered a severe stroke. I stood in the hospital corridor, staring through the window at his diminished form. The machines beeped steadily, monitoring vital signs that the doctor described as concerning. My mother sat beside him, clutching his hand, looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen her. "He's been asking for you," she said when she noticed me, her voice carrying no accusation, just exhaustion. I nodded, unsure what to say. 5 years of silence isn't easily broken. My father's eyes fluttered open when I approached, and recognition dawned slowly. "You came," he whispered, his speech slurred from paralysis on his right side. "I did." He gestured weakly for me to come closer. "I was wrong," he managed. I felt something inside me crack. 5 years of justified anger began to dissolve against my will. "We both were," I said finally. In the weeks that followed, I hired a home healthcare nurse and paid for specialized equipment, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. My siblings visited regularly, and we acknowledged each other with cautious nods that eventually evolved into actual conversations. One evening, as I was leaving after checking on my father's care, my mother walked me to the door. "I need to say something," she began hesitantly. "We made terrible mistakes with you. We expected you to be an adult while treating them like children, then punished you for becoming self-sufficient." I stood silent, letting her continue. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she added, "just wanted you to know I understand now. The properties remained in my name, and the rentals continued generating income, which I now partially used to ensure my parents received proper care. My father's medical bills were substantial, but I could afford them. When my brother's daughter was born, the first grandchild, I attended the small celebration. We weren't close, but we were civil. My sister showed me pictures of her nursing school graduation, and I congratulated her sincerely. I never regretted taking control of the assets. That decision forced everyone, including me, to face uncomfortable truths. My parents learned that actions have consequences. My siblings learned self-reliance, and I learned that justice doesn't always require permanent estrangement. Last week, I sat with my attorney reviewing an updated will of my own. In it, I allocated portions of my considerable assets to various beneficiaries, including my parents, siblings, and niece, not equally, but fairly based on need and relationship. "Are you sure about this?" my attorney asked after everything that happened. I nodded. "I'm not doing this out of obligation or guilt. I'm doing it because I choose to. The properties that started it all would eventually be sold, with proceeds divided among all of us, not because I owed them anything, but because I decided that breaking the cycle of bitterness was worth more than being right. I'd built my success by myself, now I could decide what to do with it on my own terms, not theirs, not anyone else's, just mine. And that felt like the truest victory of all." The call came on a crisp autumn morning. My niece, now 15 and incredibly bright, had been accepted to an elite prep school with a focus on science and mathematics. The tuition was astronomical. "I wouldn't ask," my brother said, his voice tight with pride and embarrassment, "but she's genuinely gifted. The scholarship covers half, but even with both our incomes." I interrupted him. "I'll pay for it. All of it." There was silence on the other end. "Why?" "Because she earned it. Because talent deserves opportunity." What I didn't say was that breaking cycles matters. My father passed away peacefully 3 years ago. At the funeral, my mother, siblings, and I stood shoulder to shoulder, not quite healed, but no longer fractured. My father's final years had been comfortable, his care exceptional.